think a couple of aspects of Dutch disease. Dutch disease occurs when the labor workers migrate from, right, migrate to the booming sector, the resource sector. So I think to find out whether or not Dutch disease, Russia suffered the Dutch disease, I think we need to look at the different sectors of the Russian economy. I think the article I uploaded discussed, the author, Rodrigo Arendt, his article discusses that different sectors of the Russian economy and competitiveness of different sectors of the Russian economy and whether or not workers migrated to the booming resource sector, right? So that's Dutch disease. And fiscal policy, Dutch disease, I think, is two aspects of to the Dutch disease. One is the migration of workers to the booming sector. Second aspect is inflation, right? So how to escape the Dutch disease, how the government implemented fiscal policy is important. So we need to examine how the Russian government implemented, fiscal policy in the form of, we use this term, sterilize, right? Inflation occurs because, big flow of, export incomes, right, occurs, right? So and that sort of gives upward pressure on inflation, right, fiscal policy. So to escape it, the government makes sure that, these rapid inflows of export incomes lead to inflation, right? To prevent that, you need to sterilize foreign exchange reserves, right? You need to sterilize it in the form of you need to remove those foreign, petrodollars, right? So you save it for rainy days, right? You put it into the account of stabilization fund, right? Or you exchange it into local dollars. I mean local currency, right? That's sterilization in professional words. So you need to sterilize those rapid inflows of foreign reserves. So we need to see how the Russian government, whether or not Russian government really managed this rapid inflow of foreign reserves. And diversification, right? Diversification, how the Russian government, whether or not the Russian government diversified the economy, the competitiveness of two important industries or sectors, right? Manufacturing industry or manufacturing sector and the agricultural sector. So studies look into the sectoral developments in the Russian economy, right? And here, I think what we have to do today is, just elaborate on all these details you might not understand. But my book I introduced last time. When I was doing the resource curse in Russia in the 1990s, my book was on the resource curse phenomenon in the 1990s. My assumption was, there was some, the entire decade of the 1990s was in general, I think, described as low oil prices, right? So in general, I think the decade of the 1990s is not appropriate for the study of the resource curse, right? But the point I made, most important point I made last class was the decade of 2000s, exactly the opposite, right? High oil prices, right? So the point, important point, the most important point is there's big contrast, right, between the 1990s and 2000s. In 1990s, the Russian policy, the Russian economy, right, and the sectoral organization, right, all these changes, and compare it to the decade of 2000s, right, and the way I studied the resource curves in the 1990s is there was a little bit of smaller booms, right? The decade of 1990s in general, low oil prices, but there were smaller booms like 1994, 1997, right? These are small booms. Then I looked into these smaller booms, then how these small booms affected the Russian economy. Like same thing, Dutch disease, sort of migration of workers, inflation, right? Those things. So I think the decade of 2000s provides us with a fantastic opportunity to test the thesis of the resource curves for the Russian economy. My study was a little bit difficult in the 1990s because, like I said, decade of 1990s in general was depressing time, right? Although there were smaller booms. So the decade of 2000s provides us with fantastic opportunity to retest the resource curves, right? And the article I gave you, article I uploaded, probably the most important article about the resource curves in the 2000s. And there was another article that I'm going to use mostly for today's class, which is, the title is Russia Sick with the Dutch Disease. The Rodiger Arendt article I uploaded last week sort of doesn't explicitly say Russia escaped the Dutch disease, right? If you read it, right, it doesn't explicitly say Russia successfully escaped the resource curse, right? Like a half and half, glass half full, half empty, right? In some aspects, Russia suffered, but in other aspects, Russia escaped. That's kind of attitude the Rodiger Arendt article takes. The article I'm going to mostly talk about today says will be useful in many ways. Says Russia escaped the Dutch disease, right? So why don't we discuss the points this article makes in what aspects Russia escaped the Dutch disease, right? Russia successfully escaped the Dutch disease. Let's discuss that. That's the focus of today's article. Although, there are two aspects, right? Political aspects, economic aspect, right? So we need to separate a little bit. Political side, I don't know, there is no, I think, rigorous study of the political side because it's quite difficult. There is no denying, right? There is no denying that Russia, under Putin administration, under the decade of 2000s, Russian political freedom suffered enormous amount of, right, like underdevelopment, right? Although, the reason behind Russian dictatorship or autocracy is not 100% caused by the resource, right, resource curse, but politically it's a difficult case for you to make Russia escape the the resource curse, political resource curse. But there are some studies that argue that Russia escaped the economic resource curse. So when we say Russia escaped the resource curse, mostly in economic aspects. First, I think that it'll be interesting. Some, I think, basic information we need to agree on before we move on to discuss the economic resource curse. First, I think the global oil price in 1999, $10, okay? $10, hovered around $10. Global oil price 2007, which just before the global financial crisis hit, about $100, right? So 10 times increase. We need to understand there's 10 times increase in international oil price, which is which leads to the increase in Russian revenue incomes, right? And this generated a huge windfall rise in export revenues and a huge inflow of petrodollars, right? And like I said, this created an upward pressure on the domestic economy and the domestic currency, beginning, right, the year 2000. And I think this article, in arguing how the Russia escaped the economic resource curse, is that the Russian government, the Central Bank of Russia, CBR, successfully successfully prevented the appreciation of the ruble, right? Appreciation of the ruble against major currencies. And I think that this hypothesis that sort of the Central Bank of Russia successfully prevented the appreciation of the ruble, I think affects the thesis that due to the appreciation of the currency, the manufacturing industry and also the agriculture industry lose export competitiveness, right? So this thesis also can be denied. In other words, Russian manufacturing industry in the decade of 2000s didn't lose competitiveness in global market, so that Russia was able to export according to this study, right? I want to see other studies also. According to this study, Russia, throughout the decade of 2000s, Russia was able to export major manufacturing items to the European Union and to major CIS countries. So we'll see, what these manufacturing items that Russia was able to successfully export, which is an interesting argument, right? Which is an interesting argument, and has to be further tested, right? Because this is a very rare case, right? So we need to see what are these items, manufacturing items, and maybe agricultural sector also, right? Didn't lose competitiveness. They were successfully exported many items in the manufacturing and in the agricultural sector. This shows different growth rates in different sectors, right? According to this study, blue is manufacturing industry, and red is oil extracting industry, and white is agricultural industry, and sort of another, a white blue is service sector. So if you look at this, 1998, obviously right after financial crisis, everything dropped, but 1999, global oil price began to rise, 1999. And 2000, oil price is higher. Then manufacturing, a percentage of exports here. 2001, 2002, a little bit weaker here, but again, went up, right? A little bit lower here, but even larger than oil extracting industry. So this shows, manufacturing industry sort of didn't lose competitiveness. And service sector is also quite strong. This is, I think this sector by sector study is very rare about the Russian economy. There were different speculations, but this is one of the rare studies on sector by sector study on Russia. Again, detailed to look at, right? Manufacturing includes different, like a food, textile, wood products, paper, right? These are manufacturing, and oil extracting. And in general, I think manufacturing industry, right? Percent of previous year, like an increase. So this negates, this denies the economic resource curves, right? Due to currency appreciation, manufacturing industry like shrinks. This doesn't apply to the Russian economy. And the basis for this manufacturing survival, I think basis for this was provided by, like I said, prudent fiscal policy, right? Currency didn't fluctuate, currency didn't appreciate. That's the basis for this manufacturing survival. So central bank implemented prudent fiscal policy. They successfully protected the Russian currency from, right, rapid inflows of petrodollars, right? The policy was correct, so the manufacturing industry was able to survive, right? So this is the focus, how Russia escaped economic resource curves. And different industries. Some industries suffer, but in general, right? And rubber, plastic products, quite strong, right? Stronger than others. And metal manufacturing products, strong here. And machinery, equipment, right? And this is almost 35% increase in electronic equipment. So it's not right, quite like a oil-based economy if you look at this, right? Some technical, right, development possible. This shows export-import growth rates. Again, 2001, 2002, same as in the previous table. In terms of economic activities, very weak in general. 2001, 2002, slow in both import, exports. Blue is exports, right? And yellow is import. Over time, imports exceeded exports. 2006, 2007. There must be different ways of interpreting this. Why imports exceeded exports? There must be different ways. Maybe, I think this includes everything, like oil and gas exports, manufacturing exports, everything. 2006, 2007, imports began to exceed exports. I mean, this is not a good sign. One way of interpreting this is that maybe the competitiveness of, investment into Russian oil and gas began to maybe decrease. So that even oil and gas exports began to stagnate in these years, which is not a good sign. And because this, sort of a typical aspect of oil exporting countries, right? In the boom time, the demand for foreign imports, right, rises, dramatically, right? Here, imports exceeded exports. Different presentation, different way of looking at the share of industry, share of manufacturing. Share of manufacturing in all exports. Right? Like a share of manufacturing almost half in terms of exports. So this denies our sort of a conventional notion of the Russian economy. This shows who imports Russian manufacturing products in 2005, right? Like food items, 24% EU. This is quite an interesting figure. China buys a lot of Russian, right, food items. Very interesting figure. Russia-China trade, CIS 18%, right? Some U.S. Textiles, majority of it EU and CIS, right? And wood paper, a lot from EU, chemicals EU, iron and steel, right? Non-ferrous metals, machinery, vehicles. Right? Soviet vehicles, Russian vehicles to many CIS countries. Electrical equipment, right? Things like that. And I think that one thing that this study doesn't do, which I focused a lot in my study in the 1990s, is that the maybe look at better to look at this. When I was studying the Russian economy during the 1990s, I thought that the company structure, like an oil company structure, oil industry structure, or natural gas industry structure, I think that is very important to look at. Throughout the 1990s, right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Soviet oil industry was disintegrated into, 13 private oil companies. So my focus at that time was to look at how these Soviet oil industry, Soviet oil bureaucracy divided into, 13 different private oil companies, and look into how that happened, right? The Soviet oil industry privatized into, past shares of the Soviet oil industry passed into private hands, right? 13 different private hands. I think this is a very ironical situation. So the first thing I did was to find out all the information about how this happened, and I found, right, a lot of interesting in these tables. If you have the copies, maybe you can turn to page 95. This is the Russian oil industry as of late 1990s. This was the Russian oil industry as of late 1990s. This is how the Russian oil industry is structured. What stands out from this is there is only one state company, which is 100% owned by the Russian government. That is Rosneft, right? This is 100% a state company, right? The state, sends maybe CEO to this company, right? Appointed by the minister or the president, right? Except Rosneft, all other companies are private companies. Some state shares, right? I mean, state shares varies, right? Some are 0, some are even 80, 90%. But technically, most of them are private companies, right? And this is in the order of, right, big oil reserves, right? The biggest oil company was Lukoil, right? In terms of volume of production, right? In terms of volume of production, they produce most oil. And in terms of oil reserves, again, they are biggest, right? Lukoil, Sidanko, Yukos is the most interesting company at that time. Yukos, the most interesting, the most ambitious company, and internationally known, right? Yukos, and as you can see here, 0.1% state share, and CEO and management skills and style very much westernized, right? Very much westernized. And what's more important, maybe shares, portion of shares may be perfunctory, right? Only on paper. What's more important than these, state shares, portion of state shares? What is more important than this is where they get funded, whether or not they can, source their funding from international financial market freely. That is more important. And Yukos was coming close. Yukos, right? So it's rather liberalized, right? Private, westernized oil company. Right? They make their own decision, right? Source funds from international, market, and there are several other interesting companies. And if I study the resource curves, economic resource curves of Russia, I think I would look at the structure of Russian oil industry today again, and how this is different today. And maybe I have some this is the Russian oil industry today. Some new players, right? This shows Russia's oil production by company, 2012, right? Yukos disappeared. Yukos disappeared. You know what happened, right? 2003, you know, President Putin sort of like a pinpointed Yukos, and they blame Yukos for tax evasion, right? Then I think Rosneft merged Yukos, right? So Yukos disappeared. So this is how the Russian oil company is structured today in terms of, again, this is how much they produce, right? From big to small. Rosneft, biggest oil company. After they merged Yukos, they produce almost 2.5 million barrel of oil, the biggest oil company. Lukoil still survives. Lukoil is still second. Used to be number one, right? Lukoil is still second. TNK BP, right? A new company, 1.5 million barrel. And this survived, right? And all others, right? And it'll be interesting to look at like shares of state government for each company. This doesn't have it, right? Shares for different companies. Rosneft, 100%, no doubt. And different shares by state for different companies. This will be very interesting. In general, I think state shares for the Russian oil industry increased after Putin came in. So people say, on the average, 45% for the Russian oil industry. Maybe it differs from company to company. And this is export destinations for Russian oil exports. Germany buys the biggest amount, like 700,000. The Netherlands second, China, Poland, Belarus, right, etc. And according to May 2013 agreement between two countries, China will surpass Germany, buying 1 million barrel from Russia. That was signed May 2013 between Xi Jinping and Putin. So we'll see whether or not China will surpass Germany. Natural gas production. Again, this doesn't appear here. The natural gas industry, that's the other aspect I looked at in the 1990s, how the Russian natural gas industry was structured in the 1990s. Not many changes. Gazprom, almost 100% monopoly in the Russian natural gas industry. I mean, still today, but there are small players, smaller players than in the 1990s. In terms of production, maybe no comparison between Gazprom and other smaller players. The biggest one, except Gazprom, is this one, Novatek. Right? One of the hypotheses we have is in low oil prices, governments, oil exporting governments, they tend to privatize the industry. And in high oil prices, they tend to nationalize. Right? Again, this is proven in the Russian case. This is the destination of Russian natural gas exports. Germany, 24%. Again, the biggest importer. After, almost same, Eastern Europe, right? 24%. And Turkey comes next. then Italy, right? Then France, UK, other Western European countries, 10%. Then I think what I did in my book in the 1990s is sort of looked at political resource curves. What I did was sort of the measurement was corruption, right? Corruption perception index. I used that, and I compared different countries, right, in the Eurasian countries, like Central Asia and other countries, and I sort of proved that the more dependent the economy on oil exports, right, the higher perception, corruption perception index, right. So that is, I think, here, CPI, corruption perception index, page 25, right. Countries with asterisks, right, those are resource-dependent countries, and mostly they are at the bottom, right? Resource-dependent countries, they are worst performers of, right, corruption. So Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Russia, Azerbaijan, those are, right, at the bottom in terms of corruption perception index. And again, another measure, state capture index. Next page, 26. This is one of the popular indexes for like a political effectiveness, state capture. State capture, I think the definition is whether or not the bureaucrats are subject to, right, bribes and others from companies. That's state capture, right? The government is captured by, right, business interests. That's the measurement. And state capture index, again, this is not as clear as perception corruption index, but, right, Russia, very low, right? Russia is highly captured by business interests. This is what this table shows. Russia is highly captured by business interests. Azerbaijan is highly captured by business interests. Kazakhstan is in the middle, right? Is in the middle. Uzbekistan, despite Uzbekistan is resource dependent, Uzbekistan in terms of state capture relatively okay. I mean, we need to, like a outlier. Uzbekistan is an outlier, so we need to see why Uzbekistan, right, escapes state capture. But again, right, this is political resource curves. Then next measurement, income inequality, page 31. Right, income inequality. Income inequality is measured by Gini coefficient. This is proven measurement, Gini coefficient. The higher the Gini coefficient, right, the stock of the income inequality, or share of income by richest 10%, right? Two different measures. And again, Russia ranked number one in terms of income inequality. Again, this is as of 2001, right? Because this was when I was doing research. So this will be much more interesting if you look at it again today. All this perception, corruption, state capture, right? Income inequality. We need to look at these again as of, right, 2012 or 2013. That study, I think, inflation, fiscal policy, diversification, manufacturing survival, these are maybe good signs for Russia, but I wonder how Russia performed on these aspects, right? Or taxation. Taxation will be interesting measurement. Taxation, because again, in the 1990s, like I said, the institutional, right? Institutional aspect of resource curves is one of the current perspectives, right? And institutional aspects, we consider taxation, corruption. I mean, these are considered for institutional performance. And Russia is very weak in terms of taxation. Tax system in Russia is not well developed, like in any other country. So taxation will be an interesting measurement for this, right? And taxation weaker, right? When they rely more on resource exports. That's the hypothesis of the resource curves. So same thing. Weak tax system, I think, appears though for those high resource dependent countries. That's the hypothesis. So that'll be interesting, I think, ways of looking at these different countries. And if you include Venezuela, Middle Eastern countries, then the data will be much more dynamic, much more interesting. But the data for taxation level, income inequality, we had education, right, in previous classes. For Middle Eastern, North African, Venezuelan, Latin American, different countries, for all these different numbers will be very interesting. If we could compile these today, right? That'll be very interesting. Russia, right? Russia is very weak in terms of income distribution. Turkmenistan is also very weak. So my point is that there are lots of things to do about the resource curves. Russia is a very interesting country. And political resource curves, like I said, the rigorous study, relatively few on the political resource curves because it's more difficult to measure, right? Economic resource curves, you have tangible measurements like, right, inflation or diversification, right, share of industry, right, currency appreciation. You have tangible measures for the economic resource curves. But political resource curves, the way I explain these Russian political resource curves is that, like 1999, oil prices began to rise. Then how Putin behaved differently. That's how I explain the Russian political resource curves. More psychological thing, right? Putin becomes very much arrogant and nationalistic, right? And like I said, 1997 oil price, international oil price, $10, right? 1998 financial crisis, right? Right after financial crisis, oil prices began to rise, right? 1999 and slowly 2000, 2001. Then, compare this movement of oil prices. Then major behaviors of political leaders in oil exporting countries. This is what Thomas Friedman did, right? And Russian behavior of Putin will be very interesting. If you compare it to movement of oil prices, how Putin behaved differently, right? Very interesting. 1999, oil prices began to rise. Putin elected, right? 2000, Putin still not confident, right? And Putin, do you know which country Putin visited first after became president? China. Putin visits China, right? Then meets with Hu Jintao. Then 2001, 9/11 occurred, right? 9/11 occurred. Then Putin danced with President Bush, right? Putin at that time still very much cooperative with President Bush. He promised to move together in terms of rooting out terrorist organizations, right? Because Russia also suffered from internal terrorist threats. 2001, Putin was still cooperative. 2002, he slowly, right, moved his head, right, and everything sort of goes to his head, right, 2002. Then he pinpointed, and he began to criticize Russian oil industry, right? He argues that Russian oil industry is much too privatized, too much privatization in Russian industry. Then, as a cover, he doesn't cancel major foreign investment deals, right? He doesn't do it just without any reason. He does it always with some like a cover reasons, like some foreign investment deals violate some. This is most popular, like a cover for Putin, some foreign investment projects, is harmful for Russian environment, some offshore projects, right? So that he does all the environmental study, then he canceled these foreign investment deal. There are several deals canceled. So this shows how Putin sort of this is always psychological. I mean, the leader as a leader, right? He knows that global oil industry is booming, right? Then he knows how much income he gets from this, right? Then he rethinks the industrial structure and foreign investment. Then he naturally becomes nationalistic, right? Expels foreign investors, right? TNK BP, the company you just saw, is now again canceled. BP has left, right? Putin expelled BP. So TNK again merged by Rosneft, right? So there are several incidents like this. Right? 2004, oil price began to really spike up, right? Then Putin becomes much more confident, right? 2003, Yukos president, right? He put into prison, and Yukos just erased. The CEO of Yukos put into prison, right? For tax evasion allegations. Then 2004, his foreign policy becomes very much, right, aggressive, right, for Central Asian countries, including America, right? Very much aggressive, 2004. So the way this article I explained sort of presented the economic resource curves is quite contrasted with the political resource curves. And then, there were many reports about, Putin. I mean, not Putin. Many journalists disappearing in Russia, right? There were many cases where Russian journalists sort of simply overnight disappeared. There is study on this. That is. I mean, the timing was just those years: 2003, 2004, 2005, right? So politically, Russia was sort of going back, right? Then Russia sort of Putin again prepared for re-election, right? Came back as president, finally. So all these, political development in Russia, maybe for cultural reasons, but in my opinion, I think in many respects, the symptoms are resource curse, political resource curse. These developments cannot be explained without, right, these international oil prices, high oil prices. So we'll see when oil prices change again and gas prices change again. Gas prices are changing because of shale revolution. Right? So when gas prices are changing, when oil prices are changing, how these Russian politics, Russian economy, in both aspects, how these will change, we need to look closely, right? Because we know some theories, theoretical frameworks. So I think that I have uploaded, these files are just, PowerPoints are uploaded already. Then I'm going to upload the article that I explained today, which is done by Dabrinskaya. The article will be uploaded. And political resource curse. There are not many studies on Russian political resource curse. The recent study on the Russian political resource curse, I'm going to upload. This is Russia cursed by oil. This is political resource curse study by Russia. Daniel Trisman, this is uploaded, right? So you have one article by Rodiger Aren last Thursday, which is like a little bit neutral. Then you have Dabrinskaya, which I explained today, which is more toward like a Russia escaped the economic resource curse type of study. Then political resource curse by Daniel Trisman. All these are uploaded. Okay, so you can read and maybe compare these different studies. And most of these figures, tables are derived from these articles. So you may want to read these articles. Wednesday, the final resource course class, Central Asia. We are going to talk about how the Central Asian countries, whether or not they escape or suffered, because we have at least 4 countries in Central Asia, right, that can be classified as resource-dependent countries. So we are going to examine these countries. Then next Monday, we are going to study the final segment of this semester. In terms of book chapter, textbook book chapter, chapter 13, chapter 14. Okay, that's East Asia, Northeast Asia. That'll be the last chapters from the book, last topic for this semester.